The winter sun was setting behind the glass towers of Austin when Elon Musk sat alone in his spacious office, scrolling through his phone. His eyes were fixed on a viral video showing a homeless person being kicked out of a local coffee shop. The comments section was filled with heated debates about how businesses treat people based on their appearance. Musk leaned back in his chair, running his fingers through his hair. He had just finished a long meeting about Tesla's new projects, but his mind kept wandering to the video. Sure, he could tweet about it or make a statement, but would that really change anything? He took a sip of his now cold coffee and stared out the window at the people walking below. Everyone looks so small from up here, he thought. It had been years since he had walked among regular people without being recognized. Every time he stepped out, there were cameras, fans, and critics watching his every move. How could he truly understand what was happening on the streets of his city? That's when the idea hit him. He picked up his phone and called his most trusted assistant. "Hey, I need you to find me the best makeup artist in Austin. And I mean the best, someone who can make me completely unrecognizable." His assistant was quiet for a moment. "Are you planning another SNL appearance?" "No," Musk replied, a hint of excitement in his voice. "I want to understand something firsthand. Remember those old episodes of Undercover Boss? Well, I'm thinking of doing something similar, but with a twist." He spent the next hour outlining his plan. He wanted to experience how people really treat those who seem to have nothing. No cameras, no film crew, just him, disguised as a homeless person trying to buy a cup of coffee. "Sir, are you sure about this?" his assistant asked. "The media will have a field day if they find out." Musk smiled, the kind of smile that usually preceded his most interesting ideas. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. But first, we need to make this experiment real. Find me some old clothes, nothing too dramatic, just worn enough to look authentic. And I want to visit different types of cafes, from fancy downtown spots to simple corner shops." As the evening grew darker, Musk's excitement built. He started researching, watching videos about homelessness in America, reading stories from people who had lived on the streets. This wasn't just going to be a publicity stunt. He wanted to understand, really understand, how differently people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer them. He pulled out a notebook and started writing down his observations, how homeless people moved, how they carried themselves, the way they counted their change carefully before entering a store. These were details he'd need to get right. He even practiced walking differently, shoulders slightly hunched, steps less confident than his usual stride. "Tomorrow," he wrote in his notes, "I'll see the world from a completely different angle. No bodyguards, no special treatment, no reservations or VIP access. Just a man trying to buy a cup of coffee with a handful of change." As he prepared to leave the office that night, he caught his reflection in the window. Soon, that familiar face would be transformed into someone society often chooses not to see. He wasn't just testing one cafe, he was about to test humanity itself. Just before heading out, he sent one last message to his assistant. "Make sure the makeup artist knows this needs to be perfect. And find me the most believable old coat you can get. This might be the most important experiment I've done in years." The elevator ride down to his car felt different that evening. Every person he passed, every security guard who nodded respectfully, every cleaning staff member who stepped aside, tomorrow they might treat him very differently. And that was exactly what he needed to experience. Early the next morning, in a private studio away from prying eyes, Musk sat patiently in a chair while the makeup artist worked her magic. She was known for her work in Hollywood, creating realistic transformations that could fool even close-up cameras. Today's job, though, was different. This disguise needed to work in real life. "Hold still," she said softly, dabbing special effects makeup around his eyes to create the appearance of tiredness and weather-beaten skin. The process was painstaking. First came the base layer that changed his skin tone, then careful shading to alter the structure of his face. She added subtle details, broken capillaries, sunspots, and the kind of weathering that comes from sleeping outdoors. Musk watched in the mirror as his familiar face disappeared. The makeup artist worked carefully to create artificial stubble, blending different shades of gray and brown to make it look natural and unkempt. She even added tiny flakes to mimic dry skin, the kind you get from exposure to the elements. "The key is in the details," she explained while working on his hands. People notice hands without realizing they're noticing them. She carefully roughened the appearance of his fingernails and added supple dirt lines that wouldn't wash off easily. The transformation wasn't just about makeup. A costume expert had brought in carefully selected clothes, a worn-out jacket with frayed edges but not too many obvious holes, pants that had been washed too many times, and shoes that were scuffed but still functional. Each piece was chosen to tell the story of someone who had fallen on hard times rather than someone who had been on the streets for years. The clothes need to look lived in, the costume expert explained, helping Musk put on the layers. But they can't be too dirty or dramatic. We want people to see someone who's struggling but still trying to maintain dignity. Musk practiced moving in his new outfit, getting used to the weight of the different layers. The jacket was heavier than his usual design of suits, and the shoes felt strange. They'd been deliberately worn down on one side to change his natural walk. Looking in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. The confident tech billionaire was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they'd been through tough times. But something wasn't quite right with his posture. "You're still standing like a CEO," the makeup artist pointed out. She demonstrated a slightly hunched posture, the kind that comes from carrying heavy bags and sleeping in uncomfortable places. "It's not about looking defeated," she explained. "It's about looking tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones." They spent the next hour working on his movement and mannerisms. Musk practiced counting change slowly, keeping his eyes down but not completely avoiding eye contact, speaking in a slightly rougher voice than his usual tone. Each detail had to be perfect for the experiment to work. Finally, they added the finishing touches. A one backpack with a few personal items and some carefully counted change in his pocket. The amount was important, enough to buy a coffee, but not so much that it would look suspicious. "Remember," the costume expert said, adjusting the jacket one last time, "you're not playing a character. You're stepping into someone else's reality. These clothes, this appearance, for many people, this is their daily life." Musk nodded, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about testing how a café would treat him. It was about experiencing, even for a brief moment, what it felt like to be invisible to society. Before leaving the studio, he looked in the mirror one final time. The person staring back at him could have been any of the thousands of people struggling to get by in Austin. That was exactly what he needed, to be completely unrecognizable, just another person trying to buy a cup of coffee on a cold morning. "Well," he said, his voice already adapted to his new persona, "let's see how the other half lives." Musk's team had spent days researching the perfect location for their experiment. They finally settled on a busy cafe in downtown Austin, known for its fancy coffee and expensive pastries. It wasn't chosen randomly. This cafe had caught their attention because of its mixed reviews online. Some customers raved about the premium coffee and friendly service, posting pictures of perfectly crafted lattes with hearts drawn in the foam. But buried in the reviews were different stories. They told a homeless man to leave before he even reached the counter, one review read. Another mentioned, "Great coffee, but I've seen how they treat people who don't look like their usual customers." The cafe sat on a corner with huge windows, letting in plenty of morning light. Through the glass, you could see business people in suits sipping their drinks while typing on laptops. The chairs were the kind you'd find in a magazine about modern design, and the menu board behind the counter listed drinks with fancy Italian names. Musk stood across the street, watching the morning rush. He'd picked this time carefully, busy enough to have plenty of witnesses, but not so crowded that he'd disrupt their entire business. He noticed how people flowed in and out, most wearing office clothes or trendy outfits. They walked with purpose, barely glancing at the person asking for change near the bus stop. His team was scattered nearby, pretending to be regular customers. One sat at a bus stop reading a newspaper, another walked her dog past the cafe again and again. A third team member was already inside, sitting in a corner with a laptop, ready to record everything on their phone without drawing attention. Taking a deep breath, Musk felt the strange weight of his worn clothes. He reached into his pocket and counted the change again, $4.75, enough for a basic coffee but not much else. The coins felt heavy in his hand as he rehearsed his plan one last time. He'd chosen his approach carefully, not too aggressive, but not too timid either. He wanted to see how they'd treat someone who was clearly struggling but still trying to be a regular customer. Someone who had scraped together just enough money for a small comfort, a hot cup of coffee on a cold morning. From his hiding spot, he watched the staff inside. The morning rush was starting to slow down. 2 workers stood behind the counter, one older woman who seemed to be in charge, and a younger person who kept glancing at their phone between customers. A group of office workers left the cafe, laughing about something as they headed toward the nearby office buildings. The smell of fresh coffee drifted out the door as it swung shut behind them. Musk's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten breakfast, wanting to make the experience as authentic as possible. He noticed small details he'd never paid attention to before, how people's eyes slid past certain folks on the street, how some customers gave a wide berth to anyone who looked out of place. It was like watching 2 different worlds exist in the same space, barely acknowledging each other. The sun was fully up now, warming the cold morning air. Musk pulled his worn jacket tighter, more out of habit than need. He'd been watching long enough. It was time to put their plan into action. His heart beat faster as he thought about crossing the street. For the first time in years, he felt nervous about walking into a cafe. Just remember, he whispered to himself, thousands of people do this every day. This is their reality. He patted his pocket one more time, feeling the change there. The coins made a soft jingling sound that suddenly seemed very loud. With one final look around at his hidden team members, Musk stepped off the curb. The walk across the street felt longer than usual. He kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched, just as they'd practiced. In his mind, he wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just another person hoping to buy a cup of coffee, trying to hold on to a small piece of dignity in a world that often looked right through him. The little bell above the door chimed as Musk pushed it open. The warm air inside the cafe hit his face, carrying the rich smell of coffee and freshly baked pastries. A few customers looked up from their phones and laptops, then quickly looked away. One woman pulled her designer purse closer to her chair. The floor was polished concrete, and his worn shoes made a soft scraping sound as he shuffled toward the counter. He kept his eyes down, counting each step, aware of how different this felt from his usual confident stride. The coins in his pocket felt heavier with each step. Behind the counter, 2 workers were busy with their morning tasks. The older woman was wiping down the espresso machine, while her younger coworker arranged pastries in the display case. Neither looked up right away, though he could tell they had noticed him enter. Musk stood quietly at the counter, carefully pulling out his handful of change. The coins made a soft clinking sound as he arranged them carefully on the spotless counter. 1 quarter rolled away, and he had to reach for it with slightly shaking hands. The nervousness wasn't entirely an act anymore. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice rougher than usual. "Could I get a small coffee, please?" He tried to make eye contact with the older worker, who was now very focused on cleaning a spot on the machine that seemed perfectly clean already. The woman finally looked up, but not at his face. Her eyes went from his worn shoes to his frayed jacket, then to the small pile of coins on her clean counter. Her expression shifted from professional politeness to barely hidden disgust. "We're pretty busy right now," she said, though there were only a few customers in the cafe. "And our payment system is down for cash transactions." She was lying. He'd watched several people pay with cash that morning. The younger worker behind her looked uncomfortable, glancing between Musk and her coworker. The cafe had gone oddly quiet. Even the usual tap-tap of laptop keys had stopped as customers pretended not to watch the scene unfolding. "I've been saving these coins," Musk said, still keeping his voice quiet. "I counted them carefully. It should be enough for a small coffee." He pushed the coins forward slightly, doing his best to keep them in a neat pile. The older worker's face hardened. "Look," she said, lowering her voice but not her tone, "there's a fast food place 2 blocks down. They might be able to help you." She emphasized the word might in a way that made it clear she wanted him to leave. A customer at a nearby table cleared his throat uncomfortably and turned up the volume on his headphones. Another grabbed their coat and hurried out, the bell chiming too cheerfully behind them. Musk felt his chest tighten. He'd expected this kind of treatment. It was partly why they'd chosen this cafe, but experiencing it firsthand was different. The shame felt real, even though he knew this was just an experiment. He thought about all the people who faced this treatment every day, without the comfort of knowing they could end the experiment whenever they wanted. He started to slowly gather his coins, each one making a small sound against the counter. His hands weren't shaking anymore, now they were steady with a different kind of emotion. He could feel the hidden camera from his team member in the corner capturing everything, documenting how quickly a person could be judged and dismissed based on their appearance. Just as he was about to turn away, the younger worker stepped forward. The look on their face showed they were struggling with a decision, one that might get them in trouble with their supervisor, but felt right in their heart. This was the moment that would change everything about their experiment. And in that moment, standing there with his handful of coins, Elon Musk, one of the richest men in the world, understood something about humanity that no spreadsheet or business meeting could ever teach him. The real test was just about to begin. The young worker behind the counter stepped forward, gently pushing past their supervisor. "I've got this," they said quietly but firmly. The older woman's face showed surprise, then disapproval, but she stepped back without saying anything. "Hi there," the young worker said, looking directly at Musk with kind eyes. "Let me help you with that." Their voice was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the cold treatment he'd just received. They started carefully gathering the coins that Musk had begun to pick up. "A small coffee, right?" they asked, counting the coins with respect, not making a show of it. "Would you like room for cream?" They spoke to him the same way they'd spoken to every other customer that morning, like a person deserving of dignity. The supervisor had moved to the other end of the counter, pretending to organize things while shooting disapproving glances their way. Other customers were watching now, some with curiosity, others with what looked like shame on their faces. "Yes, please," Musk replied softly, still in character. "Room for cream would be nice." His hands had stopped shaking, but his heart was beating faster for a different reason now. This simple act of kindness, coming right after such harsh rejection, felt more powerful than he'd expected. The young worker didn't just pour the coffee. They picked out a clean cup sleeve, carefully wrapped it around the cup, and placed it gently on the counter. Then they did something unexpected. They reached into the pastry case and pulled out a fresh blueberry muffin. "The muffins are about to be replaced with the afternoon batch," they said, loud enough for their supervisor to hear, though this was clearly not true. "This one would just go to waste anyway. Would you like it?" Musk felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't part of the experiment, wasn't something they'd planned for. This was pure, unscripted human kindness. He noticed the workers' hands trembling slightly. They were nervous about breaking the rules, but doing it anyway. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with genuine emotion now. "I don't want to get you in trouble." The young worker smiled, wrapping the muffin in paper. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following every rule. They placed the muffin next to the coffee and pushed them both forward gently. From the corner of his eye, Musk could see his team member with the hidden camera shifting slightly to get a better angle. This moment was more powerful than anything they could have scripted. "Why don't you sit down and enjoy these?" the worker suggested, gesturing to a small table in the corner. "It's cold outside, and we've got the heat on in here." They were offering not just food and drink, but a moment of dignity, a chance to be treated like any other customer. The supervisor was now openly staring, her face a mix of emotions. A few customers had put down their phones, watching the scene unfold. One businessman in an expensive suit looked down at his own untouched pastry, then back at the interaction taking place, something like recognition crossing his face. Musk picked up the coffee and muffin, his hands steady now. "Thank you," he said, putting everything he felt into those 2 words. "This means a lot." The young worker just nodded, understanding in their eyes. "Everyone deserves a warm drink and a kind word," they said simply, before turning to clean the coffee machine, giving him privacy to enjoy his breakfast. As Musk walked to the corner table, he felt the weight of what had just happened. In a world where it would have been easier to look away, someone had chosen to see him, not his appearance, not his circumstances, just his humanity. And in doing so, they taught everyone watching a powerful lesson about compassion. He sat down carefully, the coffee warming his hands through the cup. The reveal would come soon, but for now, he wanted to sit with this moment. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. The young worker watched as Musk settled into the corner table, then grabbed their cleaning cloth and started wiping tables nearby. It wasn't their break time yet, but something made them want to stay close. Maybe it was the way their supervisor was still glaring, or maybe it was just their kind heart. "Mind if I clean this table?" they asked softly, approaching Musk's spot. When he nodded, they started wiping the already clean surface, using it as an excuse to talk. "Been pretty cold these mornings, hasn't it?" Musk took a sip of his coffee, staying in character. "Yeah, it has," he replied quietly. "This coffee helps a lot. Thank you again." The worker glanced around to make sure their supervisor wasn't watching too closely. "You know," they said, voice low, "my family went through some rough times when I was younger. Lost our house during the financial crisis. We lived in our car for a while." Musk looked up, surprised by this unexpected sharing. The worker continued cleaning nearby tables, talking quietly as they worked. "I remember how people looked at us, or didn't look at us, I guess. Like we were invisible. But there were some folks who treated us like people. Never forgot that." A businessman at the next table had removed his headphones, pretending to work while clearly listening. His untouched breakfast sat cooling on his plate as he typed on his laptop with unusual slowness. "My mom used to say that kindness doesn't cost anything," the worker continued, moving to another table. "She'd share our last granola bar with someone else who was hungry, even when we barely had enough. Said it wasn't about what we had, but who we were." Musk broke off a piece of the muffin, eating it slowly. The worker's words hit harder than any prepared speech could have. This wasn't just about an experiment anymore. This was real life, real experiences, real humanity. "Got through it eventually," they said, straightening some sugar packets that didn't need straightening. "Dad found work, Mom went back to school. But I promised myself I'd never forget what it felt like. Never forget how much little kindness is meant." The businessman had completely given up pretending to work now. He was staring at his own expensive watch, then at his untouched food, something shifting in his expression. "That's why I'm saving up for college now," the worker said, their voice carrying a quiet pride. "Want to study social work. Figure maybe I can help other people who are going through tough times." The older supervisor called from behind the counter, her voice sharp. "Break time's over. We've got customers waiting." There weren't actually any customers in line, but the worker straightened up anyway. "Better get back," they said with a small smile. "You take your time with that coffee, okay? Stay warm." They gave the table one final, unnecessary wipe before heading back to the counter. Musk watched them go, struck by how this simple conversation had changed everything. He'd come here to test how people treat the homeless, but instead, he'd found something much more valuable, a lesson in genuine human connection. The businessman suddenly stood up, walked to the counter, and ordered 5 gift cards. "For the next few people who might need them," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The supervisor's face turned red, but she had to accept the payment. Musk looked down at his coffee cup, now half empty. Soon he would reveal himself and change this young worker's life forever. But right now, in this moment, he wasn't thinking about the big reveal or the viral video this would become. He was thinking about how sometimes the richest people in a room aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the biggest hearts. The worker continued making drinks behind the counter, unaware that their simple act of kindness was about to change their life forever. Sometimes, Musk thought, the best test of character is the one where people don't know they're being tested at all. After finishing his coffee, Musk quietly got up and walked toward the restroom at the back of the cafe. His team member with the hidden camera shifted slightly, making sure to capture what was about to happen. The young worker watched with concern, probably wondering if he had somewhere safe to clean up. Inside the small bathroom, Musk's transformation team was waiting. They worked quickly and efficiently, removing the layers of makeup that had turned him into a homeless person. Off came the weathered appearance, the artificial stubble, and the carefully crafted signs of hardship. The worn clothes were replaced with his usual neat outfit, simple black pants, and a well-fitted dark shirt. Looking in the mirror, he saw himself again, but somehow his face looked different. Maybe it was the memory of how it felt to be ignored, or maybe it was the impact of that unexpected kindness. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and prepared for what came next. When he stepped out of the bathroom, The cafe was still quiet. The first person to notice was a customer near the door who did a double take so dramatic that their spoon clattered against their cup. The sound made others look up from their phones and laptops. Then came the whispers. "Is that? No way. That can't be." The quiet murmur spread through the cafe like a wave. The businessman who had bought the gift cards stood frozen, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The older supervisor was the first staff member to notice. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. The cleaning cloth she was holding dropped to the floor. She remembered every word she had said, every dismissive gesture, and realized who she had been speaking to. But Musk wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the young worker, who was busy making a drink and hadn't noticed the change in the room yet. "Excuse me," he said, his voice now clear and carrying his usual confidence. The young worker turned around, ready to help another customer. Their eyes went wide as recognition hit them. The paper cup they were holding slipped slightly, but they caught it. Even in their shock, they were careful not to spill or waste anything. They started to say, but no other words came out. Their hands were shaking now, really shaking, as they set the cup down carefully on the counter. "Don't worry," Musk said, smiling warmly. "I'm still the same person you gave coffee and a muffin to. The one you shared your story with. I just look a little different now." The cafe was absolutely silent. Everyone was watching, many with phones now raised to capture the moment. The supervisor had backed up against the pastry case, her face a mixture of horror and realization. "I wanted to understand something today," Musk continued, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet cafe. "I wanted to see how people treat those they think can't give them anything in return. And you know what I learned?" He paused, looking around the room. Some customers looked away, ashamed. Others kept filming, understanding they were witnessing something important. "I learned that sometimes the richest people in the room aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the biggest hearts." He turned back to the young worker, whose eyes were starting to fill with tears. "You didn't just give me coffee and a muffin. You gave me dignity. You shared your story. You treated me like a human being." The worker tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. Their hands were gripping the counter so tight their knuckles had turned white. They had no idea that their simple act of kindness was about to change everything. "Your kindness today wasn't just about coffee and a muffin," Musk continued, his voice gentle but firm. The whole cafe was still frozen, watching the scene unfold. "You showed me what real leadership looks like. It's not about titles or money, it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, not the fancy kind with gold lettering, but a simple white card with the Tesla logo. "You mentioned you're saving for college, wanting to study social work." He held out the card. The young worker's hands were shaking so much they could barely take it. "I'd like to help with that," Musk said, "not just with the education, but with building something bigger." He glanced at the supervisor, who was still pressed against the pastry case, then back to the young worker. "My team will contact you about a full scholarship, and when you finish your degree, there's a job waiting for you." Someone in the cafe gasped. A phone clattered onto a table. The young worker's eyes were wide, tears now flowing freely down their cheeks. "But it's not just about the money," Musk continued. "I want to start a program in all my companies focused on helping people who are struggling to get back on their feet. And I want you to help design it. Because you understand something that can't be taught in any business school, you understand real compassion." The worker tried to speak, had to clear their throat twice before words would come. I was just doing what anyone should do," they managed to say. Musk smiled. "But that's exactly the point. You did what everyone should do, but what too few people actually do. You saw a person, not a problem. You shared your story, offered dignity along with that coffee. That's the kind of thinking we need more of in this world." The businessman who had bought the gift cards suddenly stood up. "I want to help too," he said loudly. "My company could offer internships, maybe partner with your program." Other customers started nodding, some pulling out business cards of their own. The supervisor had finally found her voice. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the point," Musk cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. "None of us should need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity." He turned back to the young worker. That's the lesson you taught me today, and it's one I won't forget." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out something else, the handful of change he tried to pay with earlier. He placed it in the tip jar. "Every cent of this means something now," he said, "just like every small act of kindness matters." The cafe had become more than just a coffee shop now. It had become a place where lives were changing, where a simple act of kindness had sparked something bigger. Phones were recording, people were wiping their eyes, and in the middle of it all stood a young worker who had just showed the world what real wealth looks like. "My team will be in touch tomorrow," Musk said, reaching out to shake the worker's hand. "But for now, keep doing exactly what you're doing. Keep showing the world that kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything." As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked back at everyone in the cafe. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember that you never know who someone really is, not just their identity, but their worth as a human being. Sometimes the best investment we can make is just treating each other with dignity." The video of what happened in the cafe spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, millions of people had watched the young worker's act of kindness and Musk's revelation. But what happened next was even more important than those viral moments. True to his word, Musk's team contacted the worker the very next day. The scholarship wasn't just a promise, it was a fully funded education, including books, housing, and living expenses. But that was just the beginning of the changes that one cup of coffee had started. The cafe itself transformed overnight. The supervisor, deeply affected by what had happened, posted a public apology online. But she didn't stop there. She worked with the owner to change their policies. They started a suspended coffee program where customers could pay for extra drinks that anyone in need could claim later. The businessman who had bought those gift cards turned out to be the CEO of a local tech company. Inspired by what he witnessed, he partnered with Musk to create an internship program specifically for people trying to get back on their feet. Other businesses in the area followed their lead. But the biggest change came 3 months later when Musk announced a new initiative across all his companies. Called the Human First Program, it was designed to help people experiencing homelessness return to the workforce. The program provided job training, mental health support, and housing assistance. And just as he'd promised, the kind young worker from the cafe helped design it. "We're not just giving people jobs," the worker explained in a television interview 6 months later. "We're giving them back their dignity. That's what I learned from my own family's experience. Sometimes people just need someone to see them as human beings worthy of respect." The cafe became a symbol of change in Austin. Other businesses started looking at their own policies and practices. People began treating those who seemed down on their luck differently, not with pity, but with genuine respect and kindness. 1 year later, Musk returned to the cafe. This time, he didn't wear any disguise. He sat at the same corner table, ordered the same coffee, and watched as person after person came in from the cold. Everyone who walked through that door, whether they wore designer suits or worn-out jackets, received the same warm welcome. The original video had sparked countless discussions online about homelessness, dignity, and human kindness. But more importantly, it had sparked real change. The Human First program had already helped hundreds of people find their way back to stable lives. The young worker graduated with honors and took a leadership role in the program. Their story inspired others to share their own experiences with homelessness, breaking down stereotypes and showing that anyone could face hard times and anyone could show kindness. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts," Musk said in a follow-up interview. "One person chose kindness over judgment that day, and look what happened. They didn't just change my perspective, they helped change the world." As the story spread, other cities started their own similar programs. The simple act of offering someone a coffee and a kind word had grown into a movement about human dignity and second chances. And in that cafe in Austin, where it all began, a small plaque now hangs on the wall. It doesn't mention Elon Musk or the viral video. It simply reads, "Everyone deserves a warm drink and a kind word. Kindness served daily." Because in the end, the story wasn't really about a billionaire in disguise. It was about how one person's compassion could spark a chain reaction of kindness that kept growing, touching more lives than anyone could have imagined, all starting with a simple cup of coffee and a heart full of kindness.